At 11:58 p.m. The silence in the Pinnacle Club was louder than the city 90 floors below us. The glass walls offered a vertigo-inducing view of the skyline. But the real danger was sitting right across the table. My mother, Catherine, swirled her water glass, looked me up and down with that surgical precision she had perfected over 3 decades, and delivered the first cut. "You look like you dressed in the dark, Olivia," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was a statement of fact. A cold dismissal of my entire existence. Beside her, my brother Brandon checked his watch, annoyed that I existed in his time zone. I felt my phone buzz against my thigh. A notification. $150 million. The transfer had cleared. I didn't smile. I didn't check it. I just turned the screen face down on the white tablecloth. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The sommelier approached our table with the kind of hushed reverence usually reserved for royalty or the very deeply in debt. My father, Robert, didn't even look at the wine list. He just waved a hand dismissively and ordered the 1998 Petrus, $2,500 a bottle. I watched his hands as he handed the menu back. They were trembling slightly. Just a tremor. Barely visible. But to me, it looked like an earthquake. That tremor was the only honest thing about him tonight. The rest was a performance. A desperate. Sweating performance of a man who was trying to convince the world, and himself, that he was still the king of the jungle. He wasn't. He was a scavenger in a bespoke suit. And we were all just props in his delusion. "So, Olivia," he said, leaning back as if he owned the chair, the table, and the air we were breathing. "We need to discuss this phase of yours. Here it comes. The interrogation. Your mother tells me you are still doing that small consulting gig," he continued. "It is worrying. Sweetheart, a woman of 32 needs stability. You are looking fragile." I took a sip of water and looked at them. Really looked at them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the familiar sting of inadequacy. I didn't feel the urge to defend my company, or explain that my small consulting gig was currently rezoning 3 major American cities. Instead, I felt something cold and clinical wash over me. It was clarity. I was watching a live demonstration of projective identification. They weren't attacking me. They were attacking the mirror. When my father called me unstable, he wasn't talking about my career. He was talking about the fact that his credit lines were maxed out, and he was one missed payment away from a liquidity crisis. He was projecting his own financial vertigo onto me, because it was too terrifying to keep inside his own head. Then Brandon chimed in. "You know, Liv, it is frankly embarrassing," he said, picking at a bread roll. "You have zero responsibility. You just float around while the rest of us are out here actually building the family legacy. Responsibility. That was rich coming from him. Brandon, who had lost $4 million in bad crypto trades last quarter. Brandon, who was currently under investigation by the SEC, though he thought he had hidden it well. He called me irresponsible, because looking at his own recklessness would destroy him. He needed me to be the failure, so he could remain the golden child. And Mom, she looked at me with pity. You are so lonely. Olivia, she sighed. It breaks my heart. No husband. No prospects. Just work. I looked at the woman who hadn't slept in the same room as her husband in 15 years. The woman whose marriage was a hollow shell held together by social obligations and shared debt. She called me lonely, because my solitude was a choice. And hers was a prison. They were dissecting me with surgical knives. But they were the ones bleeding out. I realized then that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. I had spent my 20s trying to fix them. Trying to be good enough. Trying to plug the holes in their self-esteem with my own achievements. But you cannot fill a cup that has no bottom. We just want you to be happy. Olivia, Dad said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But happiness requires realism. And frankly, you are living in a fantasy world. The irony was so sharp, it could have cut glass. I was the only person at this table living in the real world. They were the ones acting out a play that had been canceled 3 seasons ago. I didn't say any of that. I didn't scream. I didn't pull out my phone and show them the bank balance. That would have been emotional. That would have been engaging with their narrative. Instead, I just nodded slowly. That is an interesting perspective. Dad, I said. My voice was flat. Monotone. Boring. He blinked, confused by the lack of friction. He wanted a fight. He needed me to cry or argue so he could feel powerful by shutting me down. But I wasn't giving him fuel. I was giving him nothing. To understand why silence was my only weapon left. You have to understand the architecture of my family. We were built on a foundation of loud insecurity. For as long as I could remember. The Sterling name was something you shouted. Not something you whispered. It was plastered on buildings we didn't own. Printed on gala. Invitations we couldn't afford. And embroidered on luggage that was empty inside. While they spent the last decade vacationing in Saint-Tropez on credit cards that were cycled like a Ponzi scheme, I was in the mud. Literally. I remembered the summer of 2018. They were posting photos from a yacht in the Mediterranean. Tagging every luxury brand they could spell. I was in a hard hat in Nevada. Overseeing the groundbreaking of Ether's first solar grid. My boots were caked in dirt. My hands were blistered. I smelled like sweat and concrete. I didn't post a single photo. I didn't tag a single brand. I was too busy building the infrastructure that would eventually power the very yacht they were renting. That was the difference between us. They chased the appearance of wealth. I chased the reality of power. And nowhere was that contrast more violent than right here. At this table. I looked across at my younger sister. Jessica. At 26. She was a lifestyle influencer. Which meant she was a professional beggar in designer clothing. She was dripping in logos. Her handbag was covered in the interlocking G's of Gucci. Hip belt screamed Hermes. Her earrings were oversized Chanel logos that caught the light every time she moved her head. She looked like a walking billboard for a life she couldn't afford. I knew for a fact that the diamond bracelet on her wrist was leased. I knew because the company she leased it from used my software to run their credit checks. Her entire identity was a rental. Then I looked down at my own sweater. It was a simple, navy blue cashmere crewneck from Loro Piana. No logos. No branding. No flash. To my mother. It looked like something I had picked up at a discount rack. She didn't know that the vicuña wool cost more than Jessica's entire outfit combined. She didn't understand that true wealth whispers, while depth screams. I wasn't playing their game of status. I had ascended to a level where status was irrelevant because I controlled the board. The waiter arrived with the wine. He was a young man. Sharp. Attentive. I watched him navigate the table. When he poured for my father, he was polite. Professional. But when he moved to me, something shifted. He didn't just pour the water. He adjusted the placement of my fork by a millimeter. He met my eyes for a split second, with a look of deferential recognition. He knew. Staff always know. They see the credit cards that get declined. They hear the arguments in the hallways. And they know who tips the housekeeping staff $500, and who leaves a mess. My family missed it. Of course. They were too busy looking at their reflections in the silverware. They didn't notice that the general manager of the Pinnacle Club was hovering near the entrance. His eyes fixed nervously on our table. They didn't notice that the security detail at the door wasn't the usual restaurant bouncer, but a man who moved with the distinct, fluid lethality of ex-special forces. They only saw what they wanted to see. The daughter who had failed. The black sheep who dressed in the dark. Jessica caught me looking at her bracelet. She held up her wrist, letting the fake light hit the least stones. Pretty. Isn't it? She said. Her voice dripping with condescension. Maybe if you start taking Dad's advice, you could afford nice things too. Olivia. There is no shame in asking for help to upgrade your wardrobe. I took a sip of my water. The glass was cool against my fingertips. It is very shiny. Jessica. I said softly. She beamed, taking it as a compliment. She didn't hear the subtext. She didn't realize that in my world, shiny was an insult. Chrome is shiny. Plastic is shiny. Diamonds are a dense. Gold is heavy. But I let her have her moment. It would be the last one she ever got. The main course arrived. But the appetite at the table had vanished. The air was thick, with the kind of tension that usually precedes a boardroom coup. My father cut into his steak with aggressive, sawing motions, as if he were trying to kill the animal a second time. I knew the preamble was over. The insults about my clothes and my job were just the softening up artillery. Now came the ground invasion. We have some news. Olivia, my mother said, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. A wonderful opportunity has come up. For you? I didn't look up from my sea bass. Oh, I asked. My tone was as neutral as a dial tone. Dad stopped sawing. He leaned forward, putting on his best benevolent patriarch face. It was a mask I had seen him wear 1,000 times before asking a bank for an extension on a loan he couldn't pay back. We ran into Julian Thorne the other day. He said. You remember Julian from the club he asked about you? Specifically. I paused, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. Julian Thorne, the managing partner at Thorne Capital. A man pushing 50 with a portfolio full of strip malls and a reputation for aggressive, hostile takeovers. I remember him. I said. Well, Dad continued, his voice gaining speed. We got to talking. He is looking for a wife. Olivia. Someone from a good family. Someone with pedigree. And we told him, you were available. They weren't matchmaking. They were brokering a merger. I did the math instantly. Julian Thorne was currently trying to secure a seat on the city planning board. My father needed a liquidity injection to cover the 3 mortgages on the Hamptons estate. If they could trade me to Julian, Dad would get his loan. And Julian would get a trophy wife with the sterling name to wash his reputation. It was a business transaction. I was the asset. So, Mom added, her eyes gleaming with predatory hope. We invited him to stop by for dessert. He will be here in 20 minutes. You are going to be charming. You are going to listen to what he has to say. And if he proposes a courtship, you are going to say yes. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I took a slow sip of my water. I placed the glass back down on the coaster with deliberate care, making sure it was perfectly centered. I see. I said. That was it. 2 words. No anger. No outrage. No lecture about feminism or autonomy. Just. I see. The Grey Rock Method. It is a psychological defense strategy designed for dealing with narcissists. You become as uninteresting as a gray rock. You offer no emotional surface area for their drama to cling to. My lack of reaction hit them harder than a scream would have. You see, Brandon snapped, his face flushing pink. That is all you have to say, Dad. Just handed you a golden ticket. Julian is worth hundreds of millions. This could save. This could set you up for life. He almost slipped. He almost said save us. It is a very specific plan. I said, looking at the centerpiece. Specific. Dad slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. This isn't a suggestion. Olivia, we are tired of watching you waste your potential. You are 32. You are aging out of the market. This is us stepping in to fix your mess. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist, observing a specimen in a jar. That is an interesting point of view. I said. The boredom in my voice broke, Brandon. He couldn't handle the silence. He needed the friction. He needed me to be the villain so he could feel righteous. You are such a useless burden, he hissed, leaning across the table. The spit flew from his mouth. We carry you. We include you. We invite you to these dinners even though you are an embarrassment. And this is how you repay us, by acting like you are too good for Julian Thorne. I looked at Brandon. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the terror in his eyes. He wasn't angry that I wouldn't marry Julian. He was terrified that if I didn't, the family money would dry up. And he would have to get a real job. If you don't do this, Dad said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Then you are done. I tilted my head slightly. Done. Out of the will. Cut off. No more access to the properties. No more safety net. You will be dead to this family. I almost laughed. The threat was so hollow it echoed. They were threatening to cut me off, from a fortune that no longer existed. They were threatening to kick me out of a will that was comprised entirely of debt and liens. I understand, I said quietly. You understand? Mom asked. Her voice shrill. So you will do it. I looked at my watch. 12 11 a.m. I understand your position, I said. I didn't agree. I didn't refuse. I just acknowledged the noise. And that silence, that absolute, impenetrable wall of indifference was driving them insane. They were throwing matches at me, trying to start a fire. And I was just water. The plates were cleared. The tension at the table was heavy enough to crack the glass walls. But they interpreted my silence as submission. They thought they had won. Dad loosened his tie, a smug look of victory settling over his face. He thought he had bullied me into saving him. Then the bill arrived. The waiter placed the black leather folder in the center of the table. It sat there like a landmine. Dad picked it up with a flourish. He didn't even look at the total. He just pulled out his American Express black card, the metal one. The heavy one. The one he used to signal his importance to the world, and slapped it onto the tray. It was a performance of dominance. I pay. Therefore I lead. He didn't know that the black card is just plastic if the account behind it is empty. The waiter took the folder and walked to the service station a few feet away. We sat in silence. Brandon was texting, probably telling his bookie that the money was coming soon. Mom was reapplying her lipstick, preparing for Julian's arrival. Then came the sound. The soft, electronic beep beep of a decline. It was quiet. But in the hush of the Pinnacle Club, it sounded like a gunshot. The waiter frowned. He swiped it again. Beep beep. He typed something in manually. Beep beep. My father froze. He hadn't heard it yet. Or maybe he was pretending not to. But I saw his shoulders stiffen. The waiter walked back to the table. He leaned down. His voice, a discreet whisper that carried like a scream. I am so sorry. Mr. Sterling. The card was declined. The air left the table instantly. Declined, Dad laughed. But it was a nervous, jagged sound. That is impossible. It is an Amex Centurion. There is no limit. Perhaps it is a chip error. Sire. The waiter said diplomatically, though his eyes told a different story. Do you have another form of payment? Dad turned red. A deep, blotchy crimson that started at his neck and crawled up his face. He fumbled in his wallet. His fingers clumsy. He pulled out a Visa. A platinum card. Try this one. He snapped. And call the bank? Their fraud protection is ridiculous. The waiter took the Visa. He walked back to the machine. We all watched. We couldn't help it. We were staring at the little machine in the waiter's hand, as if it were a bomb timer. He inserted the chip. He waited. Beep beep. Brandon dropped his phone. Mom stopped applying her lipstick. Her mouth half open. The waiter returned, looking genuinely pained. I am afraid this one was declined as well. Sire. Code 51. Insufficient funds. He didn't whisper it this time. He said it. Insufficient funds. The words hung over the table, stripping away every layer of pretense my family had worn for the last decade. The vintage wine, the designer clothes, the arrogance. It all evaporated, leaving only 4 frightened people, unable to pay for a dinner they couldn't afford. Dad looked at the bill. $2,800. He looked at Mom. She looked away, studying the tablecloth. He looked at Brandon. Brandon suddenly found the floor very interesting. Then, he looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the transition from embarrassment to rage. He couldn't be the failure. Someone else had to pay for this humiliation. Olivia, he said, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. Yes. Give him your card. He blinked. Excuse me. Pay the bill. Olivia. Consider it rent. Rent, I asked. My voice calm, though inside, the steel was hardening. Rent for us tolerating you, he hissed. Loud enough for the next table to hear. Rent for the years we supported you while you played at being a consultant. You want to be independent. Fine. Step up. Pay the damn bill and stop embarrassing this family. The audacity was breathtaking. He had just threatened to disown me 5 minutes ago. Now, he was demanding I bail him out of a dinner he ordered to celebrate his own magnificence. I looked at the waiter. He was looking at me, his eyes wide. He wasn't looking at me like I was the poor daughter anymore. He was looking at me like I was the only person at the table who wasn't drowning. I looked back at my father. I don't think I will, I said. Dad's face went purple. What did you say? I said no. I didn't order the 1998 Petrus. I didn't order the tasting menu. And I certainly didn't order the disrespect. You ungrateful little dad started to rise from his chair. But he never finished the sentence. Because Dante stepped into the light. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He moved with the terrifying calm of a man who knew exactly how much force was required to break a wrist. And exactly how much restraint was required not to. He stopped beside my chair. A silent, imposing wall of charcoal wool and muscle. Miss Sterling, he said. His voice was low, polite, and carried the weight of a collapsing building. The board is ready for the vote downstairs. Shall I have the helicopter prepped for the transition? The table froze. It wasn't a pause. It was a glitch in the simulation. Helicopter, Dad sputtered. Bored. Who the hell are you? Dante didn't look at him. He didn't even acknowledge that my father had spoken. He kept his eyes fixed on me, waiting for a command. I looked at my family. I saw the confusion in my mother's eyes, the dawning horror in Brandon's. They were trying to process the data, but it didn't fit the model. Olivia, the failure didn't have a head of security. Olivia, the burden didn't have a helicopter waiting. Who is this? Mom demanded, her voice shrill. Olivia, tell your friend to leave. We are having a private family discussion. He is not my friend. Mom, I said, standing up. He is my employee. Before she could respond, the double doors of the kitchen swung open, and the general manager of the Pinnacle Club came rushing toward our table. He was a man who usually moved with the slow dignity of a diplomat. But tonight, he was practically running. He looked pale. Ms. Sterling, he gasped, arriving at the table slightly out of breath. I am so terribly sorry. The card reader. It was a system error. A glitch. We never should have presented a bill at all. Dad puffed up his chest, seizing the opportunity to reclaim some dignity. See? He barked, glaring at the waiter. I told you it was a bank error. Incompetence. I expect this meal to be comped. The general manager turned to my father. His expression shifted from apologetic to confused. Come 10, no? Sire. We have waived the fee for Miss Sterling. He turned back to me, wringing his hands. Since you own the building. Ms. Sterling. It fait? Redundant to charge you for the wine. We will handle the accounting internally. Please accept my deepest apologies for the disrespect. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. Own the building, Brandon whispered. I looked at them. I looked at the people who had spent the last 2 hours, the last 3 decades, telling me I was worthless. And I finally broke the gray rock. I let the mask slip. Just enough to show them the steel underneath. I don't just own the building. Dad, I said. I picked up the leather bill folder. I opened it, looked at the declined receipt, and then closed it with a snap. I own the bank that holds your mortgage. Dad stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. That is impossible. You are a consultant. You have nothing. I have Ether infrastructure, I said. And 3 months ago, Ether acquired the distressed debt portfolio of City National Bank. That includes the 3 mortgages on the Hamptons house, the lien on the boat, and the credit line you used to buy that suit. I looked at Brandon. And I know about the SEC investigation. Brandon. I know because when you tried to liquidate the family trust to cover your tracks, the request came to my desk for approval. I denied it. Brandon went white. He looked like he was going to be sick. You? You denied it, he choked out. But that means you are going to prison if you don't find $4 million by Monday, I said calmly. And you won't find it here. I turned to my mother. She was trembling, clutching her napkin like a lifeline. And Mom, I said, softening my voice just enough to make it hurt more. I know you aren't worried about me being lonely. You are worried because the prenup you signed 30 years ago gives you nothing if Dad goes bankrupt. And he is bankrupt. I gestured to the room, to the glass walls, to the city lights below. This dinner, this show of wealth, it was all on credit. And I just cut the limit. The devastation was total. It wasn't just a financial collapse, it was an ontological one. Their entire reality, the hierarchy where they were the kings and I was the peasant, had been inverted. They were standing on a floor that belonged to me. In a building I owned, eating food they couldn't pay for, while I held the deed to their lives. You can't do this, Dad whispered. He looked old suddenly, defeated. We are your family. No, I said. You are my tenants, and you are being evicted. I nodded to Dante. Please escort them out. And Dante, ensure they take the service elevator. The main lift is for members only. Olivia Mom screamed as Dante stepped forward. You ungrateful. We raised you. Security guards materialized from the shadows. Professional. Silent. Effective. They flanked my family. My father tried to muster some bluster. But one look from Dante silenced him. Brandon was crying. Jessica was frantically trying to hide her face from the other diners. I watched them go. I watched them being marched out of the restaurant they had walked into, like conquerors. I watched the doors close behind them. And then, I was alone. I walked to the window. The city was a grid of light and shadow below me. I could see the construction cranes in the distance. The skeleton of the next Ether tower, rising against the skyline. My phone buzzed again. A text from my mother. How could you? We are ruined. Please. Olivia. We are family. I handed the phone to Dante, who had returned to my side. Change the number, I said, and revoke their membership to the club. Done. Ms. Sterling. I turned back to the window. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in 32 years, the air didn't taste like debt. It tasted like cold. Clean oxygen. The next morning, I met with my team. Not my family. My team. Engineers from Mumbai. Architects from Tokyo. Urban planners from Detroit. People who had built their own tables because nobody offered them a seat. We sat around the conference table in the boardroom of the Pinnacle Club. The sun was rising, flooding the room with gold. I signed the grant authorization for the Urban Renewal Initiative. $150 million to rebuild the neighborhoods my father's generation had redlined and ignored. It wasn't charity. It was an investment in a future that didn't look like the past. Legacies aren't what you inherit. I realized, watching the ink dry on the page. Legacies are what you build when you stop waiting for permission. If you have ever had to build your own table because you weren't welcome at theirs, share this story. Let them watch you eat.